All right. Hey everyone, this is Alan back again, and I've got Jenna Hesterworth here, who I had mentioned on the prior video. And welcome to the conversation, Jenna.
Thank you.
So we're just gonna continue the conversation here about Google Analytics and what is last click attribution. So let's chat a little bit about it, Jenna, in the context of how you're using Google Analytics and to what extent Google Analytics can really answer that question for everyone.
Sounds good. So before we get to the last click attribution, and I want to get to the betas that Google Analytics has that talk about different attribution, out of the box attribution models that you can actually apply pretty easily. I think we are going to talk a little bit about kind of the channels and the setup and just what we're working with first. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, perfect. So if you're looking at my screen right now, the first thing I always look at is just going back to the basics and looking at the different channels and how they're rolling up to overall traffic. And I think it's for two reasons. We're constantly trying to grow more at bats or traffic. Usually in the project or property management space, it's to get more leads. So more at bats means more opportunities for leads. And so I'm always looking there, and then also want to see, okay, who's making up the pie? We have channels that are pretty consistent, and then we have ones that we have more of like a spend lever. So if I'm to increase the spend, right, all of a sudden from a paid search perspective, we'll drive a higher percent of the total traffic into the site from that channel. But from a direct and organic perspective, we want to see pretty steady growth, with the exception if something happens as far as new content that's been indexed and published that's really timely and maybe newsworthy. Every once in a while that will generate a lot of traffic, and we'll see some spikes from that as well. All right, and then the question was, where is this traffic coming from and what does it mean? So I started by talking about just the channels, but I think we wanted to drill down to referring traffic in particular. So we know that we have a little bit more control over traffic channels like paid media, organic search. We're constantly spending time trying to own the search engine results pages for specific keywords. So if somebody goes in and they say, I need to be in position number 1 for property management in Tulsa, that's what our focus would be. And we know by applying focus over many months, we can make some headway. On the referring space, some of this we're in control of and some of it less so. So as we look through these, we're going to see some that we would expect and maybe some that are newer to us because somebody's talking about the brand and then pointing into the website from their website. What questions do you have for me here, Alan?
That's perfect. Yeah. So, we're just like, we're all kind of new users to Google Analytics. So it's laid out, in terms of, as I mentioned on the previous video, acquisition, behavior, and conversion. So like, what do you focus on the most when you're looking at when Google Analytics is a tool? And how far can you really go with Google Analytics to answer some of these mysterious questions?
Good question. So I showed you just kind of where the traffic is coming in from. And that's important to me, again, because it's these early lead signals to, are we doing the right things? But of course, the lag signal, or ultimately what we all want as business owners and what we want for our clients, is to get more business. And so the next thing I'm looking at very regularly would be goal completions. And so Google calls them goal completions, but of course the goal for every website looks a little bit different. We know from a property management perspective, a lot of our clients, at least, will have a couple of different types of goals. You can schedule time. So there's Calendly links, and you can schedule time direct with the property manager. And there's also a form fill, so a lead capture. So being able to say, hey, I have this question. I want to plug it into the system. It goes right into the CRM. But we want to be able to track that and make sure that as our traffic is going up, that our lead submission rate is at least staying steady. So again, we're getting more leads for every single visitor or 100 visitors that's coming to the site. So that's something that we focus on every regular call that I have with the client. And I won't get into how you set those up, but there is, it's a little bit out of the box in that there's a goal solution and you can use unique URLs to create these events essentially. But there's a lot of things we can do in Google Analytics. So it works into whatever system we're using. With the very few exceptions, we're able to create unique events that are really based off of what the website is already trying to use, whether that's a third-party integration, or I mentioned the Calendly app. There's a host of them that we see in this space. So that would be one thing. And the other thing, I'm a little bit biased. I think Google Analytics, and I've used some very powerful, very expensive systems, but I think Google Analytics fits the bill for a lot of companies, maybe not all of them, in that it is becoming more and more customizable. And so talked about events, the other big way, which we knew we wanted to get to, was attribution. So this isn't set up here, but just to show you that there's different attribution models in beta through Google Analytics right now. We are pretty used to using what's called a last click attribution model, meaning if we get a lead, we want to know where did that lead come from, especially if they converted. So if it came from our PPC ad, for example, I want to know that. And previously, with a last click attribution model, if somebody clicked on our ad and in that same session converted into a lead, PPC would get credit for that. But we have to think about how we all interact on the web. And for me, I very rarely will fill out a form that first time on a website. I'm usually doing some competitive analysis or bouncing around a couple of different websites, and it sometimes takes even more than one session. So what would be a more accurate representation is if we have an attribution model that understands that the first click, if somebody came from our ad the first time to their website, later remembered the URL and came back directly or came back through an organic link, if it took into perspective all of those different clicks and then modeled an attribution system, I think we have a better picture of kind of what the value is from each of these channels. Without that, for example, display, which tends to drive a click, but not always the lead in that same session, doesn't get valued at the level that it should. And so a lot of times it'll, we'll pull back budget there, but in reality, we'll find months later that by doing so, the lift to our leads kind of dwindles off. So there's different systems. I mentioned the last click. There's also first click. I think it gives us equal gaps. There's linear attribution. And then there is a customizable attribution where we can say, as it gets closer to that lead, the makeup is weighted heavier. And so you can do things by kind of just measuring different weights based off of how early or late or close to the lead actually was, if that makes sense.
So Jenna, are you saying that there's an actual path that most people take? And when you mentioned organic clicks, what do you mean by that? And how does that play into this?
Yes, there is an actual path, but I would even go one step further to say there are so many actual paths. I was going to even pull one up just to see just how messy it is. And so if I'm looking at top conversion paths, sure, in some instances it's pretty clean. Somebody gets to the site, they come back, they come through it directly to place that lead. But gosh, if we start getting into the 250 other paths that have taken place, you're seeing that people are coming so many different ways and they're coming back so many different ways. Here's one I see quite often is somebody will come through a paid search ad, maybe not even just once, but multiple times. And then later, because they're familiar with the brand, they're coming back directly to say, hey, I'd like to talk to somebody, or schedule that time that we're talking about, which we're talking as, we're saying that as a lead. Okay. So lots of different paths here.
Awesome. So I've got this Band-Aid in front of me. Can you actually are you using Google Analytics in this way to actually make some changes to your clients' content or their ads based on what you're seeing from first click and last click?
Always. I'll say it's a different example than what's on the screen, but e-commerce, we tend to see signals a little bit faster, right? Because there's so many, we hope there's so many transactions that you get statistical significance a little bit faster. But what I'll see is that somebody will often click through an ad in e-commerce. And let's just say it's your favorite sporting goods. You click through an ad, maybe that ad even says, hey, get 10% off your first order. Say, interesting. They click through, they get to the website, they get this pop-up and it says, hey, sign up for our email for this 10% offer. And so again, you'll sign up for that email because you want the offer. Maybe you also want to keep up to date on different things, or if they're pushing out new releases, you want all of that information. But at the end of the day, you're also trying to get that promotional code. But then later, that person will go to their email to get the promotional code, click through the email, and then place their order. Well, at that, because of this multi-path journey, Google Ads, it looks like they aren't driving any of those leads. So we'd be quick to say, hey, pull down the spend. The return on ad spend isn't favorable. But if we were to do that without looking at it more holistically, we would be saying, okay, we don't care about these orders because without that first initial click, email is also not getting that order. So it's driving some of those conversations that lead us to make a lot better decisions when it comes down to the mix of our media spend.
Yeah, this is so awesome. I mean, this is super helpful. You've used some terms that are a little unfamiliar, perhaps, like return on ad spend, ROAS, and terms like we talked about organic clicks. We talked about creating events like URLs to create events so that you can measure that in Google Analytics and how you do that with your clients. So where can I go for some more information if I want to dive into a little bit more? Is there a glossary, for instance, or something like that I could go to that you'd recommend? Or just check out the Google Analytics site?
I was going to say, so the Google Analytics site and the forums are a good place to go. We could also put together kind of a glossary of commonly used terms, certainly. And then also Moz, even though it's not just on the paid side, but Moz has really good materials, and that's moz.com. And it talks a lot about attribution from the perspective of how all of the channels work together. So I am consistently pointing people there as well.
Awesome. So this has been super helpful. We've peeled back the onion a little bit on Google Analytics, and I'm so glad that we've got this session, this module right in the middle, because we're going to want to go back to it and talk about measurement in the context of some of these other concepts and topics that we're going to talk about that are really important and exciting in SEO. So thanks for spending the time, Jenna. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.